Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. This is where we try to make sense of, well, everything that's happening. The big breakthroughs, the global tensions, even the weird cultural stuff. We sift through it all to give you the context, the essential knowledge you actually need.
Yeah, our goal today is really synthesis. We're covering a huge range. We're going from, brand new life found miles under the sea, forensic firsts, all the way to these massive multi-billion-dollar AI deals, and then diving straight into some really tense political situations like in Iran, and also looking at disaster recovery efforts.
It's a packed agenda for sure. We've got new science, military posturing from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea, and even some surprising history lessons, whether that's how people cope in space or political threats carved in ancient stone. So let's cut through the noise and jump right in.
First up, scientific breakthroughs and the unseen world.
Okay, let's start deep, really deep. The abyssal zone. There's this initiative, Ocean Species Discoveries, and they've just announced finding 14 completely new marine species. 14. Wow, that's a lot for one announcement, especially from the deep sea.
It really is. And it's not just, slightly different fish. This expands our whole catalog of life down there. Maybe the most significant is this record-setting mollusk, Valeropolina gretchne.
Gretchene. Okay, what makes it a record setter?
The depth. They found it living below 6,000 meters.
6,000 meters. That's, what, nearly 4 miles down?
Yeah.
The pressure must be insane.
Exactly. Think about it. The average ocean depth is, 3,700 meters? So finding complex life thriving at nearly 600 times the pressure we feel at sea level, it just tells you so much about how tenacious life can be. It really challenges our ideas about where life can even exist.
And this was work done by the Schmidt Ocean Institute, right, using the RV Falkor.
That's right. The Falkor is key here. It's got these amazing submersibles, remote-operated vehicles, or ROVs, that can actually handle those crushing pressures and collect samples.
Right, state-of-the-art stuff.
Totally. And the creatures themselves often look bizarre. I mean, shaped by this world with no light extreme pressure. The reports mentioned a popcorn-like parasitic isopod.
Slight chuckle, popcorn-like. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, sounds like something out of sci-fi, but these finds are so critical. They really underscore how little we actually know about the biggest single environment on our planet.
So beyond just, adding names to the list,
Yeah.
what's the bigger picture here? Why does discovering these specific creatures matter so much?
Well, it provides a baseline, a crucial baseline for conservation. Think about what's happening down there. Deep sea mining is ramping up. There's drilling, pollution. We're impacting ecosystems we haven't even fully identified yet.
Right. We can't protect what we don't even know exists.
Precisely. So these discoveries directly feed into the urgent need to protect marine biodiversity. They inform conservation strategies against, climate change impacts, human disruption. The deep sea is becoming a real high-stakes frontier, and we're kind of flying blind without this knowledge.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, pivoting completely.
Yeah.
From the deepest oceans to the forensic lab, researchers over at Maynooth University in Ireland seem to have cracked something huge. They're calling it the holy grail of forensics.
Yeah, this is potentially massive. They've figured out how to successfully recover usable fingerprints from fired bullet casings.
Wait, from fired casings? I thought the heat and friction basically destroyed any prints.
That's been the problem for decades, exactly. When a bullet fires, the temperatures can hit over 500 degrees Celsius, plus there's intense friction inside the barrel. It usually just obliterates the oils and residue that make up a fingerprint.
So how do they manage it? What's the new method?
It's a new chemical process they've developed. It seems to involve a specialized type of vacuum metal deposition combined with some kind of bespoke imaging technique. It gets around that destruction problem.
Okay, but does that mean it's slow? Like something that takes weeks in a lab, or is it practical for, active crime scenes?
It definitely requires lab analysis. It's not instant, dusting for prints. But the report suggests it's reliable and gives high-fidelity results. The relevance is just huge. It takes a piece of evidence, the spent casing, which was often useless for prints before, and turns it into something that could potentially link a suspect directly to the weapon at the moment it was fired.
Not just handling the bullet before loading, but actually firing it.
Exactly. It could really provide much clearer evidence, potentially changing outcomes in criminal justice. It feels like a genuine leap forward in forensic tech.
That really is compelling. Okay, let's move from crime solving to human health and longevity. There's fascinating research connecting genes found in centenarians, people living past 100, to potential treatments for a really devastating condition, progeria.
Right. Hutchinson-Gilford progeria syndrome, or HGPS, it's a very rare genetic disorder, but it's just heartbreaking. It causes incredibly rapid, accelerated aging in children. They often develop conditions like heart disease, usually seen in much older people, and sadly, the average life expectancy is only around 13 years.
And it's linked to a specific toxic protein, right? Progerin.
Yes, usually due to a mutation in the lemon A gene, leading to the buildup of this progerin protein, which damages cells and drives that accelerated aging.
So how do genes from 100-year-olds help? What's the connection?
Well, the specific longevity gene they studied seems to be exceptionally good at activating cellular repair mechanisms, basically keeping cells healthier for longer.
So it's not just about slowing aging. It's about actively repairing the damage that happens over time.
That seems to be the key insight. In the research, I think it is published in Signal Transduction and Targeted Therapy, they introduced this longevity gene into cells and mouse models that mimicked progeria. And the results were pretty remarkable. They actually saw restored heart function and a significant reduction in the physical signs of aging in these models.
Wow. So the potential implications are huge, not just for progeria.
Absolutely. If they can figure out how to harness this repair mechanism effectively, maybe through gene therapy or other means, it could offer hope for progeria. But it also points towards potential treatments for more common age-related diseases, especially heart conditions. It really highlights why studying extreme longevity is so important for understanding the basic biology of aging itself.
Fascinating. And one more health breakthrough before we move on, something that could impact millions. A new way to objectively diagnose myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome, or MECFS.
Yes, this is potentially monumental for patients. People with MECFS have, for so long, faced skepticism, sometimes even dismissal, because there wasn't a clear, objective biological marker for the condition. It was often diagnosed just based on symptoms.
Which must have been incredibly frustrating for sufferers.
Immensely. So this new development is a blood test, and it's reported to be highly accurate. It works by analyzing tiny patterns in DNA.
Tiny DNA patterns.
Yeah.
Are we talking about epigenetic markers, things like methylation or gene expression?
Precisely. It looks for specific biological signatures, likely these epigenetic changes that reliably differentiate ME/CFS patients from healthy controls. The impact here is really twofold. First, it provides that objective validation. It confirms ME/CFS as a physiological disorder, which helps combat the stigma.
And second,
And this is incredibly relevant right now, it might also be useful for diagnosing long COVID.
because the symptoms overlap so much. The extreme fatigue, the post-exertional malaise, the brain fog.
Exactly. Many people with long COVID report symptoms very similar to ME/CFS. So if this test can identify a similar biological signature in long COVID patients, it could be a massive step towards understanding that condition better, developing treatments, and again, validating the very real struggles of millions affected post-COVID.
That would be a huge relief for so many people. Okay, let's shift scale now from the microscopic world inside us to deep time and outer space.
Right. Let's start with climate history locked in ice. Scientists from Coldex, that's the Center for Oldest Ice Exploration, have made a record-breaking find in Antarctica.
This is the 6 million-year-old air sample, right? Trapped in ice.
That's the one. 6 million years. It's hard to even comprehend that timescale. Finding ice that old is incredibly difficult because ice sheets naturally flow and deform over time, usually destroying the oldest layers at the bottom.
So this sample is like a pristine time capsule from Earth's deep past.
Pretty much, yeah. It gives us this unparalleled glimpse into Earth's ancient climate. By analyzing the tiny air bubbles trapped within that ice, scientists can directly measure the composition of the atmosphere back then, things like carbon dioxide levels, methane.
What does air from 6 million years ago tell us that's relevant today?
Well, it confirms a significant long-term cooling trend that Earth experienced over the last 6 million years, leading into the ice ages. More importantly, it gives us a really precise baseline for understanding natural variations in greenhouse gases before humans started impacting things. This context is vital for judging just how unprecedented modern human-driven climate change really is, both in terms of the speed and the concentration of gases like CO2. It helps anchor all our climate models.
So ancient air helps us understand modern warming. Makes sense. Now, jumping forward dramatically, but still looking back in time. Archaeologists are studying the International Space Station.
Slight chuckle. Yeah, it sounds a bit strange at first, doesn't it? Applying archaeology to something still in orbit. But think about what archaeology usually does. It studies how past human societies adapted to their environments by looking at the stuff they left behind.
Okay, so space archaeologists are doing the same, but for the environment of microgravity.
Exactly. They're looking at the ISS's 25-year history. They examine the structures, how artifacts are distributed, tools, yes, but also things like trash, wear patterns on the walls, modifications crews made. All of this gives insights into how humans create a habitable space, adapt their behavior, and manage resources in a completely closed, extreme environment like low Earth orbit.
So like where people tend to leave their tools or maybe patterns in equipment failures tells a story about life up there.
Precisely. It's about human factors, long-term resource management, crew psychology, things that are absolutely essential to understand for future, much longer space missions like going to Mars or setting up a lunar base. And there's also a heritage aspect documenting the material culture of humanity's first permanent home off Earth before the ISS is eventually deorbited.
Microgravity archaeology. That's a new one for me.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Speaking of space ambitions, India just hit a major milestone with a satellite launch.
Yes, ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, successfully launched CMS-03. This is now their heaviest communications satellite ever put into orbit.
Heaviest. How heavy are we talking?
It weighed in at 4,410 kilograms. And crucially, they launched it using their own heavy lift rocket, the LVM-3, the Launch Vehicle Mark III.
Okay, so launching their heaviest satellite on their own biggest rocket that signals real indigenous capability.
Absolutely. The LVM-3 is their workhorse for large payloads. And a satellite that size, 4.4 tons, means significant capability. The main goal of CMS-03 is to seriously boost communication coverage across India itself, but also, importantly, across neighboring ocean regions, including places like the Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
So better internet, more reliable telecommunications. It's about digital inclusion.
That's a big part of it, yes. It's an investment in connecting more people, supporting economic growth. It's really a statement about India's scientific prowess, but also about strategic national infrastructure development.
Okay, that covers some incredible ground in science and space. Now we need to shift focus to the, well, often much more turbulent world of geopolitical tensions and diplomatic chess.
All right, let's start with a situation that's been simmering for a long time but seems to be heating up again, Iran's nuclear program.
There was damage to some key Iranian nuclear sites previously, right? And now they're rebuilding.
Yes. The new Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has made a very public pledge to rebuild critical facilities, specifically Natanz, which is their main uranium enrichment site, and Isfahan, where they convert uranium ore.
That sounds like a direct challenge, especially given reported threats from the U.S. president about potential consequences if Iran pushed forward with reconstruction.
It's definitely being seen as defiance. Iran's official stance, repeated by Pezeshkian, is that their nuclear program is purely for peaceful civilian purposes, energy, medicine, public welfare.
But the international community, especially the U.S. and Europe, isn't buying that entirely, are they? What's the main sticking point?
The big red flag was earlier this year when Iran enriched uranium up to 83% purity.
83%. That's incredibly close to weapons grade, which is typically considered 90%. Civilian reactors need, what, maybe 3–5%? Medical isotopes, maybe 20%?
Exactly. 83% goes far beyond any plausible civilian need. That's what fuels the deep suspicion about their ultimate intentions. And the whole situation is made more difficult because Iran expelled many inspectors from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's watchdog.
So less oversight.
Much less. Plus, the talks to revive the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, have been stalled for years, really since the U.S. withdrew back in 2018. Iran is under heavy sanctions, yet they seem determined to push ahead, possibly calculating that the U.S. faces significant risks in launching military strikes that could escalate into a wider regional war.
It really does sound like high-stakes diplomacy through threats and counter-threats. We were just talking about an ancient Aramaic tablet with political threats, and some things don't change much, do they?
The tools change, the rhetoric changes slightly, but the fundamental dynamics of power and coercion seem quite persistent. And we see similar kinds of posturing and tension elsewhere. Let's look at Nigeria. President Trump recently stated the U.S. is prepared for military action against Islamist militants there, specifically mentioning the killing of Christians as a concern.
Okay, framing it as protecting religious minorities. But Nigeria pushed back strongly on that, didn't they, on sovereignty grounds?
Very strongly. Nigerian officials, including a spokesperson for President Bola Tinubu, were quite clear. Any foreign military intervention absolutely requires Nigerian consent and must respect their sovereignty. They also disputed the idea that the violence solely targets Christians. They emphasized that both Christian and Muslim communities are suffering terribly from terrorism and internal conflicts. It's a complex situation, not purely sectarian.
So when Nigerian officials are saying, it's our problem to solve and it affects everyone, not just one group.
Essentially, yes. While acknowledging the severity of the violence, they're asserting their right to handle internal security matters, possibly with international cooperation, but not unilateral foreign intervention.
Okay. And then there were U.S. military actions in the Caribbean. Anti-drug operations.
Yes. Reports detailed a U.S. military operation that destroyed a boat suspected of carrying drugs, and tragically, 3 individuals on board were killed. The U.S. Secretary of Defense framed this as part of combating narco-terrorists.
But this kind of action often draws criticism, doesn't it? Especially regarding lethal force outside a declared war zone.
It does. It immediately raises questions about legality and accountability. Figures like the UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, have previously condemned similar strikes in other contexts, sometimes labeling them unacceptable or even extrajudicial killings.
It's that really difficult line, isn't it, between necessary action to stop transnational crime or terrorism and actions that might violate international law or human rights norms, especially when lethal force is used without a capture or trial.
It's an extremely fine line, and often depends heavily on the specific intelligence, the rules of engagement, and whether there was an imminent threat. It's rarely straightforward.
Okay, let's shift from those specific flashpoints to broader diplomatic maneuvers, a potentially positive sign between the U.S. and China.
Potentially, yes. A significant development was the agreement to reopen high-level military-to-military communication channels between the U.S. and China.
These were the hotlines China cut off back in 2022, right? After then, Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan.
That's correct. The severance was a very deliberate signal of displeasure from Beijing. So, reopening them now, agreed upon by U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chinese Defense Minister Admiral Dong Jun, likely at the ASEAN summit, suggests both sides see the danger in not talking.
The risk of miscalculation, especially with ongoing tensions in places like the South China Sea, must be huge.
Absolutely. The main goal here is crisis management, de-escalation. Having reliable channels to talk directly during an incident is crucial to prevent things from spiraling out of control. Of course, China also attached conditions, signaling they hope the U.S. will back off what they perceive as efforts to contain China and, crucially, stop supporting Taiwanese independence. So dialogue resumes, but the core disagreements remain very much alive.
Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine continues, with developments on the air defense front.
Yes, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed they've received more Patriot air defense systems, specifically systems from Germany, bringing their operational total up to 6 out of 8 promised by Berlin.
Patriots are crucial for defense against Russian missile attacks.
Yeah.
And they're looking to get even more.
Significantly more. Ukraine is apparently preparing a contract to acquire another 25 Patriot systems. The really interesting part is how they plan to fund this potentially massive purchase.
How?
Through a large loan from the European Union. And this loan is reportedly going to be backed by the interest earned from frozen Russian assets held in the EU.
Ah, okay. So not seizing the actual $300 billion or so in frozen Russian central bank assets, which would be legally very controversial, but using the profits generated by those frozen assets.
Exactly. It's a clever, though still contentious, workaround. They're using the income stream from Russia's own money, which is frozen due to sanctions, to collateralize a loan for Ukraine's defense.
How has Russia reacted to that?
Predictably, they've condemned it strongly, calling it theft. From their perspective, any use of those assets, even the interest, is an illegal appropriation of sovereign wealth. But for the EU, it's a way to channel significant funds to Ukraine without crossing the legal Rubicon of outright asset seizure.
A complex financial maneuver with major geopolitical implications. But amidst the state-level conflict, there's also some pretty extreme rhetoric coming from certain factions within Ukraine.
Yes, there was a particularly controversial call from Dmitry Korchinsky, who leads the far-right Bratstvo party. He urged the Ukrainian military to essentially become an army of God with a mission to conquer not just Russia, but also China.
Wow, that's extremely radical language.
Right.
Army of God to conquer Russia and China.
It's very extreme. He framed the war as a kind of spiritual adventure, contrasting it with dull civilian life, and explicitly called for fostering hatred against the enemy. While figures like Korchinski might be on the fringes, this kind of ultra-nationalist, almost apocalyptic rhetoric does exist. It complicates the narrative of the war purely as national defense and can be concerning for international partners.
Definitely underscores the complex ideological currents running through the conflict. Now, turning to internal issues within Europe, particularly migration, Germany saw a big drop in asylum applications.
A very significant drop, yes. Reports indicate a nearly 50% decline, 49.6% to be precise, in asylum applications in Germany for October 2024 compared to the same month the previous year.
And the German government attributes this to policy changes.
Yes, Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt pointed directly to stricter policies. Things like expanded border controls, efforts to speed up the processing of applications, and a stronger commitment to deporting those whose applications are rejected.
And some of those deportation plans are quite controversial, aren't they? Talk of deporting people to Syria.
That's part of the hardline shift. The government is planning to initiate deportations of rejected asylum seekers deemed dangerous criminals back to Syria, despite the ongoing conflict and human rights concerns there. Even more controversially, they're reportedly in negotiations or seeking agreements with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan to facilitate the deportation of Afghan nationals whose asylum claims fail.
Negotiating with the Taliban. But Germany, like most Western countries, doesn't formally recognize the Taliban government. How does that even work?
That's the diplomatic tightrope. They're likely seeking practical, functional arrangements purely for the logistics of return, focusing on security guarantees without granting any formal diplomatic recognition or legitimacy to the Taliban. It signals a major shift towards prioritizing enforcement and domestic political pressures regarding migration, even if it means engaging functionally with regimes they don't politically endorse.
A pragmatic, maybe cynical approach driven by internal politics. And finally, in this section, unrest in Serbia. Clashes in Belgrade.
Yes, sadly. There were violent clashes in Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, between supporters and opponents of the current president, Alexander Vučić.
What triggered these specific clashes?
They happened on the anniversary of a really tragic event, a railway station collapse that killed 16 people. The protests were fundamentally about government accountability. Opponents blamed the Vučić government for corruption and mismanagement they believe contributed to that infrastructure failure and other problems. The violence really signals a deepening political crisis in Serbia, revolving around trust in state institutions and leadership credibility.
Another example of public anger over perceived government failings boiling over. That gives us a picture of some key geopolitical pressures. Let's transition now from global power dynamics to the power of technology and money. Technology, economy, and consumer pressure.
Right. And you can't talk about tech power right now without talking about artificial intelligence, AI. The spending involved in the AI arms race is just astronomical.
We saw a couple of absolutely massive deals that really illustrate this. Microsoft first.
Yeah, Microsoft inked a $9.7 billion deal with an Australian company called IRN, The Purpose, to get access to advanced NVIDIA graphics processing units, GPUs, specifically the GB300 model, to power up Microsoft's Azure cloud services for AI tasks.
$9.7 billion, that's huge. But then Amazon Web Services, AWS, and OpenAI announced something even bigger.
Much bigger. AWS and OpenAI struck a strategic partnership valued at a staggering $38 billion. Again, focused on cloud infrastructure and securing those critical NVIDIA chips needed to scale up ChatGPT and whatever comes next from OpenAI.
$38 billion, added to Microsoft's nearly $10 billion. We're talking close to $50 billion just in these two deals, largely focused on getting hardware.
Primarily, yes. It really highlights the sheer capital expenditure required to compete at the highest level in AI right now. And it zeroes in on those NVIDIA GPUs, the GB300 in particular.
What is it about the GB300 that makes it the absolute must-have hardware driving these mega deals? Why is it the bottleneck?
It comes down to the underlying architecture, NVIDIA's Hopper architecture. It's specifically designed for the kind of massive parallel processing and huge memory bandwidth needed to train and run these enormous large language models, LLMs, the kind that power things like ChatGPT. You simply can't build or run the next generation of truly advanced AI, maybe even getting towards what some call artificial general intelligence, or AGI, without this kind of specialized, incredibly powerful hardware. So right now, the AI race is very much an infrastructure race, a supply chain race for these chips.
But as the tech gets more powerful, the problems get more complicated too, right? Like this issue with Google's AI model, Gemma?
Exactly. Google had to suspend its Gemma AI model after a U.S. politician, Senator Blackburn, alleged that it generated defamatory content about her.
Okay, so an AI model saying false and damaging things about a public figure. This opens a huge can of worms legally, doesn't it? Who's responsible?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, legally speaking. Is it Google, the company that built and deployed the model? Is it the training data the model learned from, which might contain biases or inaccuracies? Is it the user who prompted the AI in a certain way? Defamation law traditionally hinges on things like intent, negligence, knowing something was false. How do you apply that to an AI that hallucinates, makes things up, but presents them as fact?
Yeah, because these models can sound so convincing, even when they're completely wrong. It's not like a typo in an article. It can weave fabrications into a very plausible narrative.
Precisely. So this incident forces a really critical debate. Should AI models be treated legally like, say, a search engine, mostly a neutral conduit for information, or more like a publisher, which carries liability for the content it produces? We're really just scratching the surface of these issues. The need for clear regulations around AI-generated content, especially concerning defamation, political discourse, and potential harms, is becoming incredibly urgent worldwide.
Okay, shifting from AI controversies to AI in creative fields, there's the new company, Utopia East.
Yes, backed by Brian Koo, who's the grandson of an LG founder, and also involving Runway AI, a company known for its generative video models. Utopia East aims to use generative AI tools like Runway's Gen 1 and Gen 2 models to fundamentally change filmmaking.
How would that work? What can these AI models do for filmmakers?
Well, tools like Gen 1 and Gen 2 allow you to generate or significantly alter video footage based on text prompts, or by applying the style of one image or video to another. This can dramatically speed up things like pre-visualization, creating storyboards, generating visual effects, maybe even creating entire animated sequences or short scenes directly from a script or description.
So it could make filmmaking cheaper, faster, maybe more accessible to independent creators?
Yeah.
That sounds like democratization.
That's the promise, yes, lowering the barrier to entry for high-quality production. But there's a huge tension here, isn't there? Democratization on one side, potential displacement on the other.
Right. If a small team using AI can suddenly do the work that used to require large crews of artists, animators, editors, visual effects specialists, what happens to those jobs?
That's the massive ethical and economic question hanging over this. We're seeing human creativity and craft skills potentially being automated or significantly augmented by algorithms. The technology pushes the how of making films forward incredibly fast, but it raises really profound questions about the value of human artistry, the why behind creative choices, when AI can generate technically perfect visuals so easily. It's a debate that's only just beginning in Hollywood and beyond.
A fundamental shift potentially underway. Okay, let's move from the cutting edge of tech to the more grounded realities of the economy. Reports are pointing to a worrying split in how U.S. consumers are doing financially, this bifurcation.
Yes, economists are flagging this as deeply concerning. What they're seeing is a clear divergence. Younger consumers and those in lower income brackets are really feeling the squeeze. Persistent inflation, high interest rates making debt more expensive, especially credit card debt, which has soared. It's putting intense pressure on their budgets.
But wealthier households are okay.
Generally, yes. Higher income groups seem to be weathering the storm much better. Their finances remain relatively stable, and they're continuing to spend. This split, this bifurcation, is worrying because it's not just reflecting inequality. It's a potential warning sign for the whole economy.
How so? Why does the stress on lower and middle income groups signal broader risk if the wealthy are still spending?
Because consumer spending from those lower and middle income groups is a huge driver of overall economic activity, of gross domestic product, GDP. If large segments of the population are forced to cut back significantly on spending because they're financially stressed, the spending by the wealthy alone might not be enough to sustain overall economic growth indefinitely. It points to potential instability down the road.
And recent government instability hasn't helped that anxiety, has it? With the potential lapse in S&P benefits.
No, it definitely amplified the stress. There was word from Treasury Secretary Bessent that SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, food benefits for low-income families might resume soon, maybe as early as Wednesday, after a potential lapse due to funding issues. But even the threat of a lapse causes immediate and severe hardship for millions who rely on those benefits. And we saw other ripple effects from government shutdowns or near shutdowns, things like major delays at U.S. airports, because air traffic controllers or security staff faced furloughs or worked without pay.
And anxiety among military families, too, right?
Yeah.
about paychecks.
Yes, confirmed reports of anxiety among veterans about benefits and active duty military personnel worrying about whether their pay would arrive on time. It just underscores how crucial stable government funding and operations are for the basic financial security of many, many people.
Definitely. On a more positive note regarding financial access, though, Experian is changing how they calculate credit scores, including rent payments.
Yes, this is actually a pretty significant move towards greater financial inclusion. Experian, one of the major credit bureaus, announced they will start incorporating on-time rent payment history into credit scores.
That seems like common sense, finally. For millions of people who rent, that's often their single largest monthly expense. But it's traditionally been invisible to credit scoring models unless you defaulted and ended up in collections.
Exactly. So if you don't have a mortgage or maybe haven't used much traditional credit like loans or credit cards, you could be incredibly financially responsible, always paying your rent on time, but it wouldn't help your credit score. Now, by factoring in that consistent rent payment history, Experian aims to help millions, particularly people from traditionally underserved communities or younger people who haven't built up a long credit history, to actually demonstrate their financial reliability.
Which could then help them qualify for better rates on loans, maybe get approved for a credit card, or even eventually qualify for a mortgage.
That's the goal. It helps level the playing field a bit by recognizing a major indicator of financial responsibility that was previously ignored, a definite positive step.
Good to hear some positive news on that front. Okay, this brings us to our next major area, social trauma, security, and public safety, where unfortunately we often see crises reveal both the worst and sometimes the best of human behavior.
Yes, starting with a really shocking incident in the UK. The mass stabbing that occurred on a train near Cambridge and Huntington.
Just awful news. 11 people wounded.
Yes, 11 injured. Reports mentioned that one of the victims was Jonathan Gajosh, a football player for Scunthorpe United, though thankfully his injuries were described as non-life-threatening. But amidst the horror, stories of incredible bravery emerged almost immediately.
The train staff, right. The
Yeah.
worker and the driver.
Exactly. Witnesses and officials praised their extraordinary courage and decisive action. The train worker, who was sadly critically injured in the process, and the driver apparently intervened directly to protect passengers and try to subdue the attacker.
True heroes, stepping up in a terrifying situation, prevented something even worse from happening, no doubt.
Absolutely. And the incident immediately prompted a policy response. The UK Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, announced a review of security measures on the railways. A key part of that review is looking at potentially increasing the use of facial recognition technology integrated with the CCTV camera systems across the rail network.
Ah, okay. And that inevitably sparks the debate, doesn't it? Safety versus privacy.
Always. On one hand, proponents argue that advanced facial recognition could help identify suspects faster, track movements, potentially even deter attacks, enhance security. On the other hand, critics raise serious privacy concerns about turning public transport into a space of constant surveillance, the potential for errors in identification, and the general chilling effect of ubiquitous monitoring on a free society. It's a really difficult balance to strike.
A debate we're seeing play out in many contexts globally. And issues of accountability for those in positions of authority also continue to make headlines in France.
Yes. A serious case in Bobigny, which is northeast of Paris, 2 French police officers were charged with the alleged rape of a 26-year-old woman while she was held in police custody.
In custody. That raises immediate grave concerns about police conduct, abuse of power, and the safety of individuals detained by the state.
Absolutely. It fuels ongoing public debate and concern in France about police accountability and systemic issues. And similar concerns surfaced in the U.S. There was video footage showing a U.S. Border Patrol agent repeatedly punching a man who appeared to be restrained in the head. This happened in a Chicago suburb following a car collision involving the agent.
Repeatedly punching a restrained individual, that immediately triggers questions about excessive force and the protocols within U.S. border enforcement agencies.
It does. It led to swift public scrutiny and calls for investigation and accountability, adding to tensions around immigration enforcement, particularly in Chicago, where reports of immigration and customs enforcement IC raids that disrupted community celebrations around Halloween and Dia de los Muertos.
Using pepper spray and making arrests during cultural holidays. That sounds designed to instill fear.
It certainly caused significant anxiety and fear within the communities targeted. In response to scrutiny over these and other enforcement actions, President Trump defended the Border Patrol and ICE agents. He suggested they are actually being held back by liberal judges and implied that more aggressive tactics are necessary for effective border control and national security. This perspective clearly frames the issue as a conflict between law enforcement effectiveness and judicial oversight or civil liberties protections.
A very polarized view of the situation, and a tragic reminder of the dangers faced by officials in other parts of the world. The assassination of a mayor in Mexico.
Yes, Carlos Alberto Manzo Rodriguez, the mayor of Uruapan in the state of Michoacan, Mexico, was shot and killed. He was shot 7 times during public Day of the Dead celebrations.
Uruapan, Michoacan. That's a region known for cartel activity, isn't it?
Tragically, yes. Michoacan is one of the states in Mexico most affected by violent conflicts between powerful drug cartels and organized crime groups. Local politicians, like Mayor Manzo Rodriguez, are often caught in the crossfire, facing immense pressure and extreme risks, whether they try to resist the cartels or are perceived as cooperating with rivals. His assassination underscores the terrifying reality and the threat that organized crime poses to governance and basic safety in parts of Mexico.
Just awful. Okay, let's turn from violence to the aftermath of natural disasters and resilience efforts. Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean.
Yes, Hurricane Melissa hit the Caribbean incredibly hard. It made landfall as a Category 5 storm, which is the highest, most devastating level. The immediate reports indicated at least 28 deaths across the region, with Jamaica, Cuba, and Haiti suffering widespread devastation.
Category 5. The destruction must be immense. What's the aid situation?
The United Nations acted quickly, allocating $4 million from its Central Emergency Response Fund, CRF, specifically for immediate humanitarian aid in Jamaica. But beyond the immediate needs, shelter, food, water, there's a huge focus on the long-term human impact. UNICEF estimated that over 700,000 children were affected by the hurricane.
700,000 kids. That's staggering.
It is, and aid organizations are emphasizing the need for emotional and psychological support, not just material aid. Helping children, and adults too, cope with the trauma of surviving such a terrifying event, losing homes, maybe losing loved ones, that's a critical part of the recovery process.
Absolutely. Trauma care is essential after disasters like that. Meanwhile, Afghanistan faced more seismic activity. Another earthquake.
Yes, a powerful earthquake, magnitude 6.3, struck northern Afghanistan. The epicenter was in the Hindu Kush region, near the city of Mazar-e-Sharif. Early reports listed at least 20 people killed and hundreds injured. There was also damage to structures, including the famous historic Blue Mosque in Mazar-e-Sharif.
And this follows other recent quakes in Afghanistan, right? There was one where rescue efforts were complicated by local customs.
That's right. This 6.3 quake happened after an earlier, related magnitude 6.0 quake in Kunar province, which is also in Afghanistan. And reports from that earlier quake highlighted a really difficult challenge for rescuers. Conservative cultural norms in some areas that prohibit physical contact between men and women who aren't related.
How did that affect the rescue efforts?
It significantly slowed things down. Male rescuers were sometimes hesitant or prevented from assisting trapped or injured women because of these deeply ingrained social customs. It's a stark example of how sociocultural factors can intersect with and complicate disaster response in very direct, life-threatening ways.
A layer of complexity you might not immediately think of. Finally, in this section, looking at environmental stress and climate resilience. A water crisis in Tehran.
A severe one, yes. Tehran, the capital of Iran, is facing a critical water shortage. One of its main supply reservoirs is reportedly nearing the point of drying up completely. This is attributed to a combination of prolonged drought conditions likely linked to climate change, and also, according to reports, years of infrastructure mismanagement.
A major capital city running out of water. The potential impacts must be huge.
Authorities are warning exactly that potential for widespread social and economic disruption if the situation isn't tackled urgently. It really underscores the vulnerability of even large urban centers to water stress and the need for sustainable water management policies.
But then counterintuitively, there's a prediction about the Sahara Desert getting wetter.
Slight chuckle. Yeah, it sounds completely backward, doesn't it, given the focus on desertification globally. But a study, I believe from the University of Illinois Chicago, UIC, predicts that due to global warming, the Sahara Desert could actually become significantly wetter, perhaps up to 75% wetter by the end of the century.
Wetter. How would global warming make the Sahara wetter?
The proposed mechanism involves changes to the African monsoon system. The idea is that warming oceans could intensify the monsoon, allowing it to penetrate much deeper into the continent's interior, bringing substantially more rainfall to large parts of what is now the Sahara.
So potentially a greening of the Sahara.
Potentially, yes, a dramatic rebalancing of the regional climate system. It's a striking prediction that highlights just how complex and sometimes unexpected the regional impacts of global climate change can be. It's not uniform warming and drying everywhere.
A greener Sahara. Definitely something to think about. Okay, let's wrap up our deep dive today with some fascinating moments in history, ancient threats and modern heists.
Right, archaeology first, always uncovering things that shift our perspective. A really significant discovery from the Byzantine era, the burial of a female ascetic. And she was found buried in chains.
In chains, wow. That suggests a really extreme form of religious devotion, maybe self-imposed penance or confinement.
Exactly. It points to a very severe form of asceticism. What makes it so significant is that historically, the narrative around this kind of extreme Christian asceticism, withdrawing from the world, extreme self-denial, mortification, has been heavily dominated by male figures. Think of Saint Anthony the Great, the Desert Fathers.
Right, it's usually monks we hear about in those contexts.
Precisely. So finding this female burial, complete with chains and also a small metal cross and some plates found with her, directly challenges that male-centric view. It provides concrete evidence that women also participated in these most extreme forms of religious practice and devotion in the early Byzantine period. It forces a reevaluation of gender roles in that context.
Rewriting the history books based on archaeological evidence. And from ancient devotion to ancient intimidation, the Aramaic tablet.
Yes, another fascinating find. A tablet inscribed in Aramaic dating back about 2,800 years, likely from the time of the Neo-Assyrian or Babylonian empires. And the inscription contains very explicit political threats. Threats of violence, threats of pillage against opponents or subjugated peoples.
So basically, ancient state-sponsored propaganda designed to instill fear.
That's exactly what it looks like. A public proclamation meant to assert dominance and warn potential enemies or restless subjects about the consequences of defiance. What's really striking, as we touched on earlier, is how similar the tactic is to modern geopolitics. 2,800 years ago, rulers used public threats of violence and destruction to maintain control, just as nations today sometimes use threatening rhetoric or military posturing to achieve political goals.
The technology changes stone tablets to press conferences or social media. But the fundamental use of fear and threat in power dynamics seems remarkably consistent across millennia.
It really does seem perennial.
Okay, and on a much more celebratory historical note, the Grand Egyptian Museum finally opened.
Yes. After many years of anticipation and construction, the GEM, the Grand Egyptian Museum, has officially opened its doors. It's located near the Pyramids of Giza, and it is vast. A reported $1 billion project covering 50 hectares, designed to house something like 100,000 ancient Egyptian artifacts.
$1 billion, 100,000 artifacts. That's monumental. What are the main highlights people can see there?
Well, maybe the biggest draw is that it houses, for the first time ever, the complete collection of treasures found in Tutankhamun's tomb. Over 5,000 items together in one place, plus other major pieces, like a colossal statue of Ramses II that greets visitors. It's a massive boost for Egypt's cultural heritage preservation, and, of course, for tourism. A truly world-class museum.
Incredible. Something to add to the travel list. Okay, let's end today with our crime of the day, which involves another famous museum, the Louvre in Paris. The crown jewels heist.
Ah, yes, the notorious theft of the Louvre's crown jewels. Over $100 million worth of historic jewels stolen in a really dramatic fashion. But the truly remarkable part is who did it.
Not like a sophisticated international jewel thief ring.
Chuckles.
Yeah.
Not even close. That's the twist. The investigation revealed it was carried out by a group described as local amateurs and petty criminals from Seine-Saint-Denis, which is a relatively low-income suburb northeast of Paris. Not the suave Ocean's 11 type crew you might expect.
Amateurs pulled off a $100 million heist at the Louvre. How did they even manage it?
Their methods were surprisingly crude, apparently. They used a mover's lift, like the kind used for furniture, to get up to a second-story window. They smashed through protective glass, and then reportedly used angle grinders and other basic tools to break into the display cases. The whole operation was incredibly fast, less than 7 minutes from start to finish, with accomplices apparently waiting on scooters outside for the getaway.
Smash and grab, basically. But extremely high-value smash and grab.
Exactly. But the detail that really highlights their, let's say, lack of professional polish is what they didn't take.
What did they leave behind?
They left Empress Eugenie's diamond crown, arguably the single most valuable, most famous piece in that entire collection. They grabbed over $100 million worth of other jewels but missed the star attraction. They also reportedly left behind some of their tools, even personal items at the scene. It just screamed amateurism and poor planning, despite the massive haul.
Wow. Steal $100 million in jewels, leave the priceless crown and your own stuff behind. It's quite the footnote in crime history.
A truly bizarre case. It seems like it was sheer audacity and perhaps exploiting a momentary security lapse rather than any kind of sophisticated planning or expertise. Opportunity met incompetence with a huge price tag.
An unbelievable story to end on. So, reflecting back, we've covered an incredible amount today, from, life surviving in the deepest ocean trenches to the billions pouring into AI hardware, and right through to the courage of ordinary people in a crisis like that train attack.
We really have spanned the globe and different scales of human endeavor and challenge. And if we think back to that 2,800-year-old Aramaic tablet, the one with the political threats, it really does provide a kind of anchor for a final thought, doesn't it?
Also,
Well, that persistence of power dynamics, the core issues around sovereignty, using threats implicit or explicit in diplomacy, the struggle to maintain control, these seem fundamentally unchanged. Whether the threat is carved on stone thousands of years ago, or it's reflected in modern military deployments in the South China Sea, or maybe even in economic sanctions, the underlying political struggle feels constant.
it does raise that profound question then. We're making these incredible leaps technologically, scientifically. We can analyze 6 million-year-old air. We're building AI that can write or create images. We explore space. But politically, diplomatically, maybe even socially, are we just running in place? Are we dealing with the same basic human conflicts driven by the same motivations of fear, power, and tribalism, just with fancier tools?
It certainly feels that way sometimes. Maybe the complexity of human nature, our own ingrained behaviors and biases, remains the one variable that science and technology haven't quite figured out how to solve or significantly improve upon. That's definitely something for all of us, for you listening, to mull over.
Indeed it is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back next time.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.